Hello, Brubs. We're back with Cawdor by Robinson Jeffers. 1928 narrative poem. 8. Hood, coming in to breakfast from the fragrant light before sunrise, had set his rifle in the corner by the door. George Cawdor left the table, and going outdoors stopped at the door and took the rifle in his hands. Out of mere idleness, Hood sharply, "Mine, put it down." He nettled, carried it with him to the next room, there opened the outer door, and lined the sights with a red lichen fleck on a dead cypress twig. Hood came behind him and angrily touched his shoulder, reaching across his arm for the rifle. Then George, who had meant to tease him and give it back in a moment, remembered a grudge and fired. The sharp noise rang through the open house like a hammer blow on a barrel. Hood, in the shock of his anger, standing too near to strike, struck with his elbow in the notch of the ribs. His hands to the rifle. George groaned, yet half in sport, still wrestled with him in the doorway. Hood, not his mind, but his mind's eye, the moment of his elbow striking the muscle over the heart, remembered his dream of the night. A dream he had often before suffered. This came to his mind later. Not now. Later, when he thought there is something within us knows our fates from the first, our ends from the very fountain, and we in our nights may overhear its knowledge by accident, all to no purpose. It never warns us enough. It never cares to be understood. It has no benevolence, but only knowledge. He struggled in his dream's twilight, high on the dreadful verge of a cliff, with one who hated him, and was more powerful. The man had pale, flaming gray eyes. It was the wind blowing from the eyes, as a wind blew from Farah's, that forced him to fall, screaming. For in a dream one has no courage nor self-command, but only effeminate emotions. He hung screaming by a brittle laurel bush that starved in a crack of the rock. From that he had walked in terror. He had lain and thought if Farah should come, but yet once more pleading for love, he would yield. He would do what she wanted, but soon that sea lion shrieking from the hollow ocean thoroughly awakened him. His mind stepped over the weakness, even rubbed it from memory. What came to him now was only the earlier dream mixed with its rage of fear, so that he used no temperance in the strife with his brother, but struck the next blow with his fist, shortened to the mouth, felt lips on teeth. They swayed in the gape of the door, Hood the aggressor, but George the heavier, entwined like serpents. The gray steel rifle barrel between their bodies appeared a lance on which both struggled impaled, for still they held it heedfully, the muzzle outward against the sky through the door. Hood felt a hand close on his shoulder like the jaws of a horse, and force him apart from the other. He twisted himself without a mind and fought it without knowing whom he fought with. Then a power struck his loins, and the hand snapped him over. He fell, yet with limbs gathered came up as he struck the floor. But even in the crouch his mind returned. He saw his father, the old man still stronger than both his sons, darkening above him, and George rigid against the wall, blue-faced beyond the light of the door. But in the light, behind Cawdor, Michael with pitiful eyes, he said, "Give me the rifle." George, who still held it, sucked his cut lip and gave the rifle to Cawdor. Then Hood rose and stood trembling. But Farah on the stair behind them, she had heard the shot and come down halfway. "What have you killed?" she said. "The mountain lion? You snapping foxes, what meat will you take, and be quiet a little? Better than you lies quiet up here." But why did her voice ring rather with joy than anger? "You deafen the ears of the dead. Not one of you there is worthy to wash the dead man's body." She approached the foot of the stair. Her face was white with joy. "Poor Hood, has he hurt you? I saw him pluck you off with 2 fingers, a beetle from a breadcrumb." "It's lucky for them they'd taken your gun away from you," Cawdor said somberly. "What do you want here? The boys have played the fool, but you can be quiet." And George, she answered, his mouth is bleeding. What dreams have stirred you to make you fight like weasels before the sun has got up? I am a woman by death, left lonely in a cage of weasels, but I'll have my will. Quarrel your hearts out. Then Cawdor turned to Hood and gave him the rifle, and said to George, I'm going to the hill with Hood, and mark a place for the grave. Get down some redwood from the shop loft, the 12-inch planks. When I come down, I'll scribe them for you, and sticks of 2x4 to nail 2 at the chest corners. Farah cried, What a burial! A weasel coffin maker and another weasel to dig the grave, a man buried by weasels. Cawdor said heavily, Come, Hood. And Farah, the gun too? Be careful after the grave's dug. I wouldn't trust him. He turned in the door. By God, I am very patient with you for your trouble's sake, but the rope frays. They had gone, and Farah said, What would he do? Beat me, perhaps? He meant to threaten me, Michael. The man is a little crazy, do you think, Michael? She walked in the room, undoing the dark braids of her hair. Why should he blame me for what I say? Blame God. If there were any, your father is old enough to know that nobody since the world's birth ever said or did anything except from bitter need. Except from bitter need. How old are you, Michael? 15, she said. Dear, please. Oh, you'll soon come to it. I am better than you all. That is my sorrow. What you think is not true. She returned upstairs to the still room where one window was blinded, but the other one ached with rose-white light from clouds, and nothing breathed on the bed. But Michael hasted and went up the hill to look to her caged eagle. Hood and her father, she feared, would have to move the cage to make room for the grave. She returned and heard a soft roaring in the kitchen of the house. Why have you got the stove roaring? Maria? Does that say Maria? Ilaria. Okay. She want hot water. Ilaria Kana answered. She put the boilers over and opened the drafts. I pile in wood. Farah came down. Not boiling? Not yet? Put in more oak. Oh, are you there, Michael? Common water is fair enough to bathe in at common times, but now let's lock out of doors. I want it hot. There are certain stains. Come on. We'll be back when it's hot. In the wind outdoors, she trembled and said, The world changes so fast. Where shall we go? To the shore? Passing the workshop beside the stable, they heard a rhythmic noise of 2 harsh notes alternate on a stroke of silence. Farah stopped dizzily still, and after a moment, although it sounded like my father's breathing the days before he died, I'm not fooled, Michael. A weasel, she said, gnawing wood. Don't be afraid. She entered. George lifted his dark eyes from the saw cut in the wine-colored redwood planks, and Farah, Oh, have you planed them too? That's kind. The shavings are very fragrant. How long will these planks last in their dark place? Below they rot, and the earth fills them. 10 years? These never will rot. Oh, that's a story, not redwood even. There's nothing under the sun but crumbles at last. That's known and proved. Where's the other weasel? He looked morosely into her face and saw that her eyes gazed past him toward the skin of the mountain lion that Hood had given her. It was nailed wide and flat in the gable end to dry, the flesh side outward, smeared with alum and salt. Your brother Weasel, she said. Hood, Hood, the one that nibbled your lip. How is it swollen? How it is swollen. Not George, but Michael answered that Hood was up on the hill. They had to move my eagle's cage. Farah looked up at the lion skin. I'll take that, George. That's mine. The raw skin? No matter, she said. Get it down. It's for my father. What else have we got to give him? I'll wrap him in it to lie like a Roman among the pale people on your fine planks. You're more of a child than Michael, he said compassionately. When you said child, your face, she answered, softened, I thought. It's not like Hood's. He climbed up by the workbench and drew the tacks. She stood under him to take the skin. Michael beside her. The scene in the dim workshop gable end wakes a sunk chord in my mind. In the mind, the scene is a descent from the cross. the man clamoring and drawing the tyrannous nails from the pierced paws, the sorrowful women standing below to receive the relic. Heavy hanging spoil of the lonely hunter, whom hunters rejoice to kill. That image maker, its drift of metaphors. George freed the skin. Farah raised hands to take it. Her small, hard, pale brown hands astonished him, so pale and alive. Folding the tawny rawhide into a bundle. "Where's Cawdor?" she said. "Your father on the hill with Hood?" "He had gone up to Box Canyon with Dante Vitello," Michael answered, and Farah, "Oh, but how hard it is. Perhaps it could be oiled." "It is like a board. I'll take it to him." But Michael remained with George, tired of her restlessness and afraid of her eyes. Farah went up carrying the skin in her arms and took it into the house. Ilaria Akana came out to meet her. "Your water's boiling. Well, let it stand." She laid in the still room upstairs, the hard gift over her father's body. "Oh, that looks horrible," she cried, shuddering, and twitched it off to hide it from sight. She forced it into the wardrobe against the wall, the one she had moved to block the broken window in the wild time of storm. She stood and whispered to herself and eyed the bed. Then she returned outdoors and up the hill to the grave, in the oak's earth bench above the house. The pit was waist deep already, and Hood was in the pit lifting the pickaxe between the mounds of wet red earth and cut roots. Akana leaned on a shovel above the pit mouth. For lack of room, they had dug west of the oak. The two old graves lay east. The eagle's cage was moved a few feet farther west. Hood labored between the cage and the oak. Jesus Akana, from under the low cloud of the oak boughs, his opaque eyes in Indian silence, watched Farah come up the hill. But the eagle from the cage watched Hood labor, the one with dark indifference, the other with dark distrust. It had watched all the grave digging. Farah stood among the cut roots and said, lifting her hand to her face, "I was worn out yesterday with not sleeping. Forgive me for foolish words. I came up here to tell you, for I suppose you'll go away tonight or tomorrow morning. Well, I am taught. I wish that when you go, you'd take for a gift one of my white ponies. They'll have to bear being parted. Goodbye. Live freely, but not recklessly. The unhappy old man for whom you are digging the hole lost by that. He never could learn that we have to live like people in a web of knives. We mustn't reach out our hands, or we get them gashed." Hood, gazing up from the grave, "I'm sorry, yes, early in the morning." He glanced at Akana and said, "One thing I know, I shan't find loveliness in another canyon like yours and Michael's." She turned away, saying, "That's no help," and seemed about to go down, but again turning, "I meant to gather some branches of mountain laurel. There are no flowers this time of year, but I have no knife. It shouldn't be all like a dog's burial. I'll cut some for you." He climbed out of the grave and said to Akana, "I'll soon be back. If you strike rock at this end, level off the floor." Farah pointed with her hand, trembling. "The trees in the gap behind the oak trees. It's farther, but the leaves are much fresher." Indeed, he deserves laurel. His mind had wings and magnificence. Deserves laurel. Deserves laurel. His mind had wings and magnificence. One dash of common cunning would have made famous and died a cow's death. You and I, if we can bear the knocks and abominations of fortune for 50 years yet, have as much to hope for. Don't come. I'm not a cheerful companion. Lend me the knife." He thought she had better not be trusted alone with it, the mine she was in, and went beside her above the older graves. He felt his knees trembling. Across the steep slope to the far oaks, dark aboriginal eyes, the Indians and the coast range eagles, like eyes of this dark earth, watching our alien blood pass and perform its vanities. Watch them to the far oaks. But after the oaks had hidden them, Akana covetously examined the hunter's rifle, left behind leaning against the lichened fence of the older graves. It was very desirable. He sighed and set it back in its place. Farah, in the lonely oak-shielded shadow under the polished laurel leaves. Before you came, I used to come here. She caught her quivering underlip with the teeth to keep it quiet, for solitude. Here I was sure no one would come, not even the deer, not a bird, safer than a locked room. Those days I had no traitor in my own heart, and would gather my spirit here to endure old men. That I have to die is nothing important, though it's been pitied sometimes when people are young, but to die in hell. I've lived some days of it. It burns. How I'd have laughed last year to think of anyone taken captive by love. A girl imagines all sorts of things when she lives lonely, but this was never. Who knows what the dead feel? And it is frightful to think that after I have gone down and stilled myself in the hissing ocean, roll, roll on the weed, this hunger might not be stilled, this fire nor this thirst, for how can anyone be sure that death is asleep? I've never found the little garden flower temperance in the forest of the axe of God. Oh no, all's forever there, all wild and monstrous, outside the garden, long after the white body beats the bone on the rock teeth, the unfed spirit will go screaming with pain along the flash of the foam, gnawing for its famine a wrist of shadow. Tortured by the sea, screaming your name. I know these things. I am not one of the careful spirits that trot a mile and then stand. He had bared his knife blade to cut the bough, enduring her voice. But Farah caught the raised wrist. Let it be. We have no right. The trees are decent. But we, a redwood cut to make the coffin, and oak's roots for the grave. Someday the coast will lose patience and dip and be clean. Ah, is it men you love? You are girl-hearted. That makes you ice to me. What do you love? What horror of emptiness is in you to make you love nothing? Or only the deer and the wild feet of the mountain and follow them as men do women? Yet you could dip that little knife blade in me for pleasure. I'd not cry out more than a shot deer, but I will never leave you until you quiet me. She saw that his face was gray and strained as a spent runner's beaten at the goal. Will you kiss me once? You are going away in a moment, forever. What do you owe Cawdor? What price of kindness bought you? This morning it was, he struck you and flung you on the ground. You like that? He gathered his strength and turned himself to be gone. She caught him and clung and fallen to her knees when he moved outward. I swear by God, she said, I will tell him that you have taken me against my will if you go from here before I have spoken. You'll not be hurt, Hood. You'll be far off, and what he can do to me is no matter. He said, you have gone mad. Stand up. I will listen. But she, feeling at last for the first time some shadow of a power to hold and move him, would not speak nor stand up, but crouched at his feet to enjoy it. At length she lifted wide, staring eyes and fever-stained face. I am very happy. I don't know what has told me. Some movement or quietness of yours. She embraced his thighs, kneeling before him. He felt her breast against them, her head nuzzling his body. He felt with his hand the fire of her throat. Nothing, he said, is worse, nor more vile than what we are doing. What? With a little sin, if you call it, kill a great misery? No one, she thought, ever tastes triumph until the mouth is rinsed with despair. She sobbed, I have found you. But when he had dropped the knife at the tree's root, to free his hand and lay by her side on the drifted fall of the crisp oak leaves and curled brown laurel leaves, then she who had wooed began to resist him, to lengthen pleasure. I have lighted the fire. Let me warm my hand at it before we are burned. The face of her exultation was hateful to him. He thought of the knife in the leaves and caught it toward him and struck the point of the blade into the muscle of his thigh. He felt no pain a moment, and then a lightning of pain. And in the lit clearance, I am not your dog yet, he said easily. I am not your thing. He felt her body shudder and turn stone above him. What have you done? A half inch into the blood, he answered. I am better. He stood up. You will be grateful tomorrow. For now we can live and not be ashamed. What sort of life would have been left us? No life is left us, she said from a loose throat. This mountain is dry. She stood and whispered, I won't do anything mean or troublesome. I pitied my father's failures from the heart, but then quietness came. Her teeth chattered together. She said, I will now go down if you let me. He followed, limping from the Addis gesture outside the oaks and watched her creep toward the house. The blood gliding by his knee, he rubbed a handful of earth against the stain in the cloth to embrown the color and went faintly to the work he had left. I believe that's the end. That's the end of 9. 9er. 9. All right. That's all, bruv. Goodbye. Goodbye.